There are decisions so monumentally idiotic that even centuries later, the word oops doesn't quite cover it. Let me be clear. I voted against admitting Earth. Not because I feared them. Oh no. Back then, the idea of fearing humans was like fearing a slightly upset mushroom. At best, they were a novelty act. Loud, erratic, with a peculiar obsession for touching things that clearly should not be touched. At worst, they were a mildly embarrassing species with far too many teeth and far too little impulse control. The council chambers were unusually loud that day. That should have been a warning sign. The council is rarely loud unless someone's pet empire has collapsed or someone's third cousin has exploded in a diplomatic incident. But this time, it was Earth. A backwater mudball with a knack for inventing gadgets and getting into wars with itself. I remember Councillor Drawl of the Cathari Empire scoffing loudly. "They've barely cleared their atmosphere," he sneered, gills flaring with theatrical offense. "They invented nuclear weapons before a unified government. Barbaric." Others agreed. In private, some even muttered the word feral. But the vote passed anyway. Pressure came from the Rimworld League, a coalition of scrappy outer systems that were desperate for allies with manufacturing muscle. Earth had that in spades. Apparently, humans could build a space freighter out of scrap metal, caffeine, and profanity. That impressed the Rimworlders. It disturbed the rest of us. I remember the human ambassador, Mr. Grant, I think his name was. He didn't smile much, didn't bluster like others had predicted, just stood there in that stiff cloth wrapping they call a suit, arms behind his back, listening, watching, like he was cataloging everything. Someone near me joked that he looked like a predator pretending to be prey. I chuckled. I shouldn't have. It started, as many catastrophes do, with a misunderstanding. The Drevi Syndicate, a minor but proud species known for their smugglers and a shockingly high tolerance for spicy liquids, had been running trade through the Palin Expanse for decades. Unofficially, of course, the Expanse belonged to no one and everyone. No laws, no flags, no oversight. Just a nebula-thick mess of forgotten colonies and occasional pirate signals. Then the humans showed up. A small colony transport, unarmed and barely shielded, landed on one of the moons orbiting Telor Phi. It was a farming effort, or something like it. Dirt, greenhouses, kids, and the sort of inefficient optimism that made other species uncomfortable. They named it Hope's Reach. Humans are like that, always naming things like they're challenging the universe to punch them. The Drevi didn't take kindly to the intrusion. They issued no warning, no comms, no diplomacy. Just dropped 2 landing skiffs with mercenaries, stormed the place, and relocated the human settlers, which, in galactic terms, means they killed most of them and sold the rest into bonded labor. One of the dead was a child. I didn't see the footage, but I read the report. A girl, name classified, who died trying to shield her younger brother. A tragic event. The kind the council routinely filed under regrettable incident and then moved on. Except this time, the humans didn't move on. That's what I remember most. The silence. No retaliation. No accusations. Just quiet. Earth didn't issue a single threat. No protests. No rallies. Ambassador Grant didn't storm the council floor or demand justice. He simply stopped speaking. He would attend meetings, nod, scribble in that little paper rectangle they all seemed to love. But he said nothing. Not a word. Not for weeks. Some saw it as proof of humanity's inferiority, that they had no stomach for diplomacy, or maybe they didn't understand how galactic politics worked. I remember someone saying, perhaps they're too primitive to know they've been insulted. That one didn't age well. Looking back, I think that was when everything started to unravel, not with a scream, but with an exhale, a long, quiet breath, and a waiting. Because while we laughed and congratulated ourselves for managing the humans, they were watching. The thing about silence, true, suffocating silence, is that it makes you start to hear things that may not be there. A shifting of weight, a breath held too long, a look that lingers half a second past polite. Ambassador Grant had become a phantom in the council chambers, always present, never participating, just listening. Sitting there in that same gray suit, those cold blue eyes fixed on whoever dared speak. I remember catching his gaze once, not by accident, but because I'd been staring too long. He didn't blink, he didn't smile, he didn't frown. He simply noted me and then looked away. I felt like a specimen that had just failed an experiment. The council's weekly sessions continued as normal. Reports were read, treaties debated, pirates condemned, and still, Earth said nothing. When someone finally asked the human delegation for their stance on a routine trade accord, Grant simply nodded and slid a data slate across the table. It contained exactly one line. "We are watching." I should have known then, should have sounded some kind of alarm, but I didn't, because at the time the message seemed almost petulant, childish, as if Earth was pouting. The Drevi Syndicate, on the other hand, became more vocal, emboldened even. One of their senior envoys, a bulbous, sulfur-smelling brute named Vok, mocked the human response in open council. "They send farmers to an outlaw system and expect a parade?" he chortled, voice gurgling like a backed-up sewer line. "Perhaps they should try raising goats on a volcano next time." The chamber laughed. Grant did not. He stood, calmly, smoothly, and walked out. No fanfare, no protest, just absence. A week later, Drevi trade convoys began vanishing along the rim routes. Not destroyed, just gone. Entire fleets silent, no distress calls, no debris. The council assumed pirate activity and sent investigators. The investigators never reported back. At this point, even I began to suspect that Earth had decided to respond, but not in any way we had anticipated. Most species, when provoked, sent warships, filed grievances, launched retaliatory raids. Humanity? They simply erased the board and left the pieces in place. I tried to bring it up in a closed-door session, suggested that perhaps we'd underestimated our newest members. Councillor Drawl snorted and called it primitive paranoia. I remember the exact words he said. If they had power, we'd have seen it by now. He died 3 weeks later, not in war, not in some heroic blaze. He simply stopped existing. His diplomatic shuttle was found adrift, systems dead, hull unbreached. Every soul aboard had vanished. Not a mark, not a message, just empty seats. The only thing left functioning was the shuttle's internal sensor logs. The last line recorded before the blackout was the sound of human boots, the kind they wear in atmosphere. Heavy, rhythmic, deliberate. It was a Tuesday. I remember because that's the day the human ambassador chose to break the silence. The council hall had just descended into its usual bickering over tariffs, ship lane protocols, and some petty dispute over mining rights on a moon no one had ever heard of. Ambassador Grant, as always, sat still, motionless in that stiff posture only humans seemed to tolerate. Then, without warning, he stood, just like that. No sound cue, no diplomatic request for floor time, no gesture to the speaker orb. He simply rose to his feet, and the room went dead silent. You may not believe this, but the silence wasn't out of respect. It was fear. Something about the way he moved, smooth, certain, final, made half the chamber instinctively straighten in their seats. I watched the Drevi envoy stiffen, his smug smirk fading like a dropped torch in vacuum. Grant walked to the center dais. He carried a box, not a data pad, not a holodisk, a box, made of some matte black alloy that didn't reflect light correctly. It seemed heavier than it should have been. He placed it gently on the central platform, tapped a code on the side, and then stepped back. The top slid open with a hiss. Inside was a shoe, small, caked in dust, scorched slightly around the heel, a child's shoe. No one said a word. Then the holoprojector activated. Footage, silent, grainy, from the colony, Hope's Reach. It showed fire, panic, Drevi mercenaries, screaming mothers, dead children, bodies stacked like cargo. Still, not a word from Grant. He didn't narrate. He didn't plead, he showed. The final frame lingered. A young girl, perhaps 8 human years, lying face down, her arms wrapped protectively around a toddler. And then the screen went black. Only then did he speak. His voice was calm, flat, measured like a surgeon's scalpel. Earth acknowledges the Drevi Syndicate's actions. Earth notes the Council's silence. Earth will now act independently. Earth will not be dissuaded. Earth will not forget. We are not making a request. This is not diplomacy. This is notification. He didn't wait for applause. There was none. He didn't wait for outrage. There was only dread. He turned, walked back to his seat, and sat down. No further words. Just that. The Drevi delegation stormed out 5 minutes later. No one stopped them. Later that day, an unmarked human ship appeared in the Teller system. Not a fleet, just one vessel. A Scout-class corvette, if records are to be believed. It hovered in orbit above the Drevi's forward operating base. Then it fired once. A single kinetic slug. No radiation, no AI targeting, no atmospheric destabilizer. The base ceased to exist. There were no survivors. And still, Earth did not declare war. Ambassador Grant broke Earth's silence by presenting a child's shoe from the Hope's Reach massacre and showing council footage of the Drevi atrocities. His speech was chilling and final. Earth would act independently without seeking permission or forgiveness. Shortly afterward, a single unmarked human vessel destroyed the Drevi's forward operating base in Teller with surgical precision. Earth made no formal declaration of war, only a notification. The council was left in shock. The Drevi stormed out. And Earth? It remained quiet. Story. There's a common misconception about humans, that they're loud, reckless, emotional creatures who act before they think. It is, I now realize, a fatal miscalculation. After the incident at Teller, many of us braced for war. The kind we knew: declarations, fleets, ultimatums, grand speeches filled with bloated pride and ritual threats. But Earth made no such move. Instead, they sent engineers. That was the first sign this wasn't going to be a normal war. 3 weeks after the Teller strike, human vessels began arriving in fringe systems. Not battlecruisers or dreadnoughts, but cargo haulers, orbital scaffolds, AI-automated resource harvesters. They came to rebuild Hope's Reach, not the colony, the idea. New settlements, each named after virtues: Resolve Station, Memory Point, Redemption Line. The symbolism was deliberate, each one located dangerously close to Drevi trade routes. But here's the thing: humans didn't build military outposts. They built farms. They built schools. They built lives. It was bait, of course, but bait that bled sincerity. A kind of moral dare to the rest of us. Try and destroy this too. See what happens. And the Drevi, tragically predictable, took the bait. A minor skirmish broke out near Redemption Line. A Drevi scout ship fired on a human freight transport, claiming the vessel was illegally mining unlicensed territory. The humans did not respond with missiles. They responded with a lawsuit, filed, politely, in triplicate, through proper council channels. Boring, bland, utterly procedural. At first, I thought it was a bluff. Surely Earth wouldn't tolerate another attack on their citizens with paperwork. But it wasn't a bluff. It was a record. The humans were documenting everything, not just deaths, but timing, trade routes, sensor logs, supply manifests, DNA scans of ship fragments. I saw one of their reports, over 9,000 pages long, cross-referenced against 5 languages and backed by orbital imagery. They weren't just preparing to retaliate. They were building a legal case for extermination. Ambassador Grant resumed speaking, sparingly, always brief, always measured. He once answered a Drevi accusation by simply sliding forward a single ditastic and saying, "We have calibrated our patience. It has an upper limit." That's when the council truly began to fracture. Old alliances cracked. Fringe races fell silent. Even the stubborn Veldari, who once claimed humans were emotion in search of a trigger, began reinforcing their outer colonies. I tried to speak to Grant privately once. He refused. His aide, a tall woman with ash blonde hair and scars down her neck, greeted me instead. I tried to joke, to diffuse. She didn't smile. "We don't want revenge," she said. "We want precedent." I didn't sleep well after that. Because war, I realized, was not what Earth was preparing for. They were preparing for court, and they were going to bring evidence soaked in blood. The lecture wasn't meant to be public. It was supposed to be a closed-door session, a cultural exchange between the Human Defense Corps and select junior diplomatic delegates. Nothing classified, nothing threatening, just a discussion on Earth's legal doctrines concerning armed conflict. I attended because I was curious, not suspicious, curious, foolish in hindsight. The speaker was a mid-ranked human named Staff Sergeant Mason, trim, square-jawed, eyes like frozen oceans. He wore no medals, no ornate symbols, just a simple uniform pressed to perfection with a nameplate that gleamed under fluorescent light. He greeted us with a nod, no flourish, no introduction beyond. This is what your species would call a lecture. For us, it's a reminder. What followed was the most terrifying 40 minutes of my life. He began by defining terms, rules of engagement, civilian immunity, proportional force, all standard principles across most civilized species. Then he moved on to human variations. That's when the tone shifted. He explained war crimes, the way a butcher might explain knife care, without malice, but with unsettling precision. He described actions that would be considered criminal even during open conflict, targeting hospitals, using civilians as shields, mistreatment of prisoners, denial of medical aid. A hand was raised, a junior Veldari diplomat. She asked, "And what happens if such crimes are committed by your enemies?" Mason blinked once. "Then they are no longer enemies," he said. "They are criminals, and war stops being war. It becomes justice." Another delegate asked how Earth differentiates between vengeance and law. Mason smiled just slightly. "Revenge is emotional. We don't trust emotion in operations. What we do is systematic, documented, auditable, and final." He then listed punishments, not philosophical ones, actual sentences carried out by Earth's military tribunals. Cases where entire command structures were dissolved posthumously, where orbiting fleets were disarmed, then destroyed, because one commander ignored surrender protocols. He cited names, dates, coordinates, and then he ended with a story. A human child abducted during a skirmish on a border world. The perpetrators? A mercenary band funded by a minor cartel no longer in existence. Earth didn't bomb their holdings. They purchased the cartel through shell corporations. Legally, quietly. Then shut it down from the inside, executed the guilty, freed the slaves, burned every record. The child's name was classified, but Mason looked directly at me when he said, "We found her, alive, intact, one broken arm. She's in school now, draws rockets." The room was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed afraid to hum. When the lecture ended, no one clapped. No one spoke. Most of us just filed out, quietly, blinking too much, avoiding eye contact. I remember walking back to my quarters, heart thudding in my chest like a failing reactor. My mind kept replaying the same thought. We should never have let them in. They didn't call it a fleet. Of course they didn't. They called it a Mobile Infrastructure Deployment Group. Cute, bureaucratic, entirely disarming, on paper. But when one of those groups entered the Arvalon Drift, we saw it for what it really was. 6 capital-class hulls, 24 escort frigates, carrier support, orbital foundries, combat medics, logistics vessels with modular bays the size of city blocks. Every ship unpainted, just bare alloy and human script along the hulls. They weren't polished for ceremony. They weren't cloaked for stealth. They were raw, and they were ready. When questioned, Ambassador Grant calmly informed the Council that Earth was deploying support assets to ensure security in formerly lawless sectors. He even offered to share supply routes with other members, should they wish to benefit from enhanced civilian safety protocols. Translated from Grant speak, "You're welcome to hide behind us if you behave." The Drevi, predictably, lost their minds. Their delegation stormed into an emergency session, foam forming at their gland lines, accusing Earth of militarizing the fringe. Grant didn't respond. His aide did, the same ash-blonde woman from before. Earth is providing humanitarian oversight. If that makes you nervous, perhaps you have something to hide. I won't pretend the rest of us weren't rattled, because while the Drevi screamed, Earth built. 1 week after the support fleet arrived, sensors picked up orbital platforms being constructed over former Drevi-linked worlds. Not weapons. Courthouses. Fully automated legal processing centers, surrounded by high-capacity holding cells. Thousands of them, orbiting entire planets, constant comms traffic, civilian records, satellite archives, translated testimonies, It wasn't a military occupation. It was law enforcement on a galactic scale. I asked one of Earth's junior legal advisors about the facilities. He told me flatly that the first tribunal had already been scheduled. Charges ranged from war profiteering to the use of non-consensual genetic testing on bonded labor. I asked how many defendants were expected. He scrolled a list on his tablet. It took 5 minutes just to get through the A's. Every name, every crime, every signature. We keep receipts, he said. The Drevi made one last move, a raid. Desperate, sloppy. A fleet of 14 ships attacked Justice Spire, the orbital tribunal near the Teller Expanse. 12 of their ships were disabled before reaching firing range. No deaths, no counterattack. The humans simply boarded, confiscated the vessels, and filed piracy charges. Charges, not missiles, not bombs, paperwork. The Drevi captains are still floating in orbit, in legal limbo, screaming for someone, anyone, to call it an act of war. But no one will, because technically, Earth hasn't broken a single law. And yet, their fleets grow, their stations multiply, their silence deepens, and the galaxy begins to realize, this isn't occupation, it's preparation. The hammer fell at midnight. No fanfare, no trumpets, just a timestamp in an Earth document filed under case ID #47291F. Enforcement action initiated Drevi syndicate crimes against sentience. Within 2 hours, 7 Drevi-controlled systems had lost control of their comms, not through jamming, not through EMPs, but by having their networks recoded in real time, overwritten, line by line with Earth standard protocol. Even their warning systems had to ask permission to activate. Their fleets launched, finally ready, finally provoked, but they launched into silence. No orders, no signals, just empty stars and encrypted channels. And then the seizures began, not attacks, not invasions, seizures. Human boarding teams, zero-G trained, ECM equipped, biologically screened, moved through Drevi stations like whispers through a prayer. They didn't destroy anything, they simply took control. One by one, Drevi officers were marched into holding bays, not tortured, not interrogated, just read their charges. Some tried to resist. They died instantly, no explosions, no theatrics, just a single slug through the heart. Legal, documented, filed under active threat response. By dawn cycle, 5 Drevi governors had been arrested, 2 executed during attempted escape, and over 3,000 former bond slaves were in human medical recovery centers, receiving care most council members didn't offer their own citizens. The footage was broadcast live, but Earth didn't show the raids or the deaths. They showed the trials, open tribunals, multi-species translation, witness statements, evidence tables. Entire ecosystems of crime laid bare. Genetic experiments, forced labor, unauthorized displacement, bioweapon trafficking. Each defendant was allowed counsel. Many tried to deflect blame. None succeeded. Sentences were swift, final. Some were imprisoned. Deep cryo-storage in Earth's penal moons. Others were executed. One Drevi admiral, notorious for his involvement at Hope's Reach, was asked for last words. He said, "You're not judges. You're monsters." The presiding human officer, wearing a black uniform with no insignia, responded, "Incorrect. We're what comes after monsters." Execution carried out. Public, clean. Broadcast on an encrypted galactic channel with open access. The reaction? Silence. Then panic. Within days, 3 minor cartels dissolved voluntarily. 2 council member species submitted full reports of their own colonial abuses to Earth's tribunals, hoping for leniency. Even the council itself changed. Emergency reforms, new oversight subcommittees, a unanimous vote to expand interstellar humanitarian law enforcement, which conveniently meant giving Earth more power. And still, Ambassador Grant said almost nothing. Just one statement, read aloud at the next council meeting. "Let this stand as precedent. Justice delayed is justice collected. With interest." He sat down. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My throat was dry. My claws were trembling, not from anger, not even from fear, from the realization that I was witnessing not a war, but a reformation. And Earth was not requesting cooperation. It was rewriting the rules. They stopped calling them humans. They started calling them arbiters. Not officially, of course. The council still clung to its terminology like a drowning man to driftwood, but in quiet rooms, in coded transmissions, in whispered panic behind locked bulkheads, everyone used the same word: arbiters. I asked a Vrinka merchant once why he used the term. He answered simply, because they don't kill to conquer, they kill to correct. And no one wanted to be corrected. Trade lanes shifted overnight, whole economies restructured around Earth-controlled zones. Planets once considered untouchable by law enforcement began requesting human oversight. Not because they believed in Earth's justice, but because they feared the alternative: Earth's silence. There were no more raids, no more Drevi incursions. In fact, the Drevi ceased to exist as a unified government. Their records were wiped, their leaders imprisoned or vanished. Their homeworld was placed under a multinational caretaker agreement, with Earth, naturally, holding the executive veto. Some of their species still live. I've seen them. Docile, quiet, eyes cast downward. They work. They comply. They do not speak unless spoken to. I suppose that's what happens when your gods turn out to be mortal, and your judges worse. And Earth didn't gloat. They didn't celebrate. They didn't build monuments to their justice. They built schools. Yes, actual schools. Educational facilities for Drevi juveniles, run by humans and volunteer staff from Earth-aligned races. I visited one, out of morbid curiosity. No security turrets, no barbed wire, just books, artificial sunlight. A boy with silver skin and wide black eyes drawing a flower on the wall. A human teacher correcting his syntax softly, patiently. It shook me more than the executions ever could. Earth didn't want to destroy the Drevi. They wanted to rehabilitate them. I remember walking through the halls, listening to lessons in multiple tongues, and feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not awe, not disgust. Something like irrelevance. Because Earth wasn't just changing the galaxy's systems. It was changing its soul. The Council tried to adapt, of course. They passed new laws, Earth-inspired, naturally. They expanded humanitarian corridors. They created oversight committees with Earth's legal scholars at the helm. But it was all catch-up. We weren't governing anymore. We were following. And Earth? They continued as if nothing had changed. Ambassador Grant attended meetings. He spoke rarely, smiled never. But his presence alone was enough to silence entire chambers. One time, a new delegate, a brash insectoid from a species I won't name, tried to challenge Earth's authority. Claimed their dominance was a bluff, their legality a mask. Grant didn't respond. He just tapped a button on his slate. A screen lit up. Coordinates, footage, financial transactions, medical scans, crimes, not Earth's. The delegates. Charges were read within the hour. Arrest followed before sunset. No one protested. That night, a memo was quietly circulated among council members. Earth does not bluff. Earth watches everything. It wasn't even signed, because everyone already knew who sent it. I remember the first time I met a human. Not Ambassador Grant, not some military officer or legal drone, a real human, civilian. She was sitting in the gardens behind the council hall, a place where even the wind treads softly. She was young, perhaps 20 cycles, with copper-brown skin and a datapad covered in hand-drawn stars. I don't know what I expected. Defiance, arrogance, the cold eyes of their tribunals? She looked up and smiled. "You're Terrell, right?" she said, her accent soft but clear. "I read your paper on interspecies negotiations. Your metaphor about linguistic gravity was brilliant." I was not prepared for praise. We spoke for over an hour. She asked about Zenthar art, about the way our species sings during bonding rituals. She even tried mimicking our pitch structure. Poorly, but with enthusiasm. I asked her finally why she was here. A political spy? Diplomatic plant? She laughed. "I'm just a student. Earth lets anyone study abroad now. And I like learning what came before." What came before? That phrase stuck with me, because I realized in that moment she wasn't just curious about our culture. She was studying it like one studies ruins, fascinated, respectful, but entirely certain it belonged to the past. The realization made me nauseous. I excused myself, wandered, thought. And now, days later, as I stare across the council chamber where Ambassador Grant sits in silence, flanked by aides who seem more like executioners than assistants, I can't stop thinking about that young woman. She didn't see me as a peer. She saw me as history. How did we let it happen? I replay the early days in my head, the smug laughter when Earth joined, the dismissive comments, the way we waved off their industry, their crude diplomacy, their awkward reverence for law. We thought them quaint. But they were building something. They were watching. And we were laughing at the architect while he laid foundations under our feet. Now our colonies echo with Earth's protocols. Our courts cite Earth's precedents. Our children study Earth's wars as moral parables. Some of our own scholars call for constitutional rewrites, inspired by Terran jurisprudence. It's not colonization. It's conversion. And I fear it is irreversible. I fear it may even be deserved. Because when the Drevi burned Hope's Reach, we filed a memo and forgot. Earth did not. They buried the dead. They held the killers accountable. They built sanctuaries where we would have raised flags. They did what we claimed to believe in. And we hated them for doing it better. I sit here now ashamed. Not because I failed to stop them, but because I didn't try to learn from them. I don't know if we'll survive Earth's rise, but if we do, it won't be because we resisted. It will be because we remembered how to be better. And if we forget again, Earth will remind us, with silence, with a file, with a sentence, with the cold efficiency of something that has learned to hunt monsters by becoming the thing that monsters fear. And I, Terrell, former diplomat of the Zenther Union, will be watching too. Because some things deserve to be witnessed, even if they leave you haunted. The meeting room was unusually full. That should have been my first warning. Delegates who hadn't shown their faces in years now sat upright, robes polished, eyes heavy with the kind of quiet desperation usually reserved for moments of extinction-level diplomacy. Earth had called a session, not requested, called. And everyone came. There was no preamble, no gavel, no titles. The lights dimmed and Ambassador Grant stepped forward, alone, no aides, no armor of silence this time. He looked older, not aged, just tired, but his voice was the same. Calm, even, cold only in its discipline. 17 years ago, a child was killed in a greenhouse under a red sun, he began. No one cared, except us. No one interrupted, he continued. You mistook our silence for weakness, our restraint for confusion, our compassion for primitive sentimentality. You laughed, you mocked, you moved on. He turned slightly, scanning the room. We didn't. The holoscreens flared to life, not with war footage, not with executions, with data, timelines, star charts, supply chains, diplomatic correspondences, judicial reviews, every action Earth had taken since joining the Council, laid out, open, unhidden. Then came the comparisons, charts showing reductions in bonded labor, decreases in interspecies violence, increases in educational access, healthcare, judicial transparency. Earth hadn't been cleansing the galaxy. They'd been stabilizing it. We came because your systems were broken, Grant said. We came because your justice was procedural theater. We came because if no one else would protect the innocent, we would. Not for dominance, not for vengeance, for order. A Drevi child appeared on screen, now 10 years older, standing in a classroom reciting human ethical doctrine in 4 languages, one of the last survivors of Hope's Reach. Her name is Lyra. Silence. You could hear skin tighten across bones. We don't need more territory. We don't want control. We don't seek tribute. He paused. We want no more Lyras. It hit like a blow across the face, because we had all failed her. Not just the Drevi, not just the pirates, not just the corrupt. All of us. Because we had let her die. Or worse, we had allowed the system that killed her to keep functioning. Earth did not. Grant's final words were softer. We will leave the Council. We do not require approval. We never did. But if you wish our guidance, you will follow our law. Not because we force you to, but because it is better. Then he stepped away. No vote was taken. No treaty signed because it didn't need to be. Within a day, 2/3 of Council member states submitted formal requests to adopt Earth's judicial model. The rest? silently began rewriting their laws anyway. Earth didn't take power. We offered it to them. Because in the end, the most dangerous species wasn't the one with the biggest weapons. It was the one with the clearest moral compass and the audacity to use it. And now, we are aligned. Because we've seen the alternative. And we know Earth is still watching, not to control, but to catch the next silence before it becomes a scream. I write this now from my residence on Keltrin and Eyes. It's a quiet world, far from the old centers of power. The stars here are soft, and the air is heavy with pollen that glows faintly at dusk. No one rushes here, no one plots, and yet even here, in the most peaceful corner of space I've known, they are watching, not with drones or probes or warships, with standards. Every judicial decision rendered here passes through an Earth-modeled oversight board. Our educators use Terran ethics materials. Our translators include a clause. All terms subject to reinterpretation under Terran Code Section 4. It's subtle, elegant, impossibly thorough. Some call it the Earth Shadow. But I call it something else now. I call it earned fear. You see, we thought they came for influence, for territory, for pride. We projected our own ambitions onto them, assuming they were as corruptible as we had been. But Earth didn't want any of that. They wanted to make sure no one else ever needed to become like them. Because that's what we missed. That's what took me years to understand. Earth is not just dangerous because it is powerful. Earth is dangerous because it never wanted to be. They became what they are because they had no choice. Because they watched too many innocents buried under flags, under systems, under bureaucracy and compromise. They watched the galaxy shrug at atrocity. And so they built something too disciplined to look away. Some say they're cold, that their justice lacks heart. But I've seen their hospitals. I've seen the survivors of Drevi camps learning to read under human teachers who once served in orbital bombardment fleets. I've seen Marines kneel beside war orphans and teach them how to plant trees. Not because it is strategic, but because it is right. And that's what terrifies the old guard more than anything else. That humans don't need to be cruel to be effective. They just need a reason. Give them one. One child murdered, one family enslaved, one system corrupted. And they will turn the wheels of an entire civilization to end it. Quietly, precisely, forever. So to those who come after, to the species not yet charted, the ones who may one day see Earth's ships and wonder what manner of creature hides behind those steel-gray hulls, let me offer you this, from someone who once laughed at them: do not provoke them. Not because they will burn your cities, but because they will catalog your crimes, cross-reference your excuses, locate your hidden assets, disable your satellites, audit your culture, and then remove you from history with all the passion of an accountant balancing a spreadsheet. And afterward? They'll build a library where your capital once stood, and they'll name it after the child you forgot. Because Earth remembers everything, especially the things the rest of us choose to ignore. So beware Earth, yes, but more than that, understand Earth, and you may survive them.